Hello and welcome to today's episode of Piano TV. So we're going to talk about sonatinas today, and we've talked about sonatas on this channel before, and I can't exactly remember the video title. I'll link it on the screen here, but it was, I think, like a Mozart analysis, and we just kind of talked about the sonata form and like a little bit of brevity. Like, we didn't go into super crazy depth or anything, but anyway, check that one out because there's going to be a lot of tie-ins with today's sonatina video, because a sonatina is basically just like a mini sonata. So the reason I want to talk about sonatinas today is because sonatas are usually like pretty big, complex, difficult pieces that you're not going to be ready to tackle until you're at like a more advanced level. But sonatinas, being smaller by nature, are a lot more doable from a beginner level, not beginner, from like an intermediate level onwards, like anywhere between that grade 3 to 8 level. I feel like sonatinas act like a bridge that allow you to get to the more complicated sonatas, and they're really important to learn because of that. But that being said, they are not easy. They often, almost always, require like fast fingers, dexterity, the ability to smoothly execute technical passages like scales and triads and stuff like that. So what we are going to talk about today is what a sonatina is, the form of a sonatina. We're going to listen to an example and kind of talk through the form with some sheet music and so on. Anyway, let's get started. That was a long intro. Aside from being a little bit easier than sonatas, sonatinas also tend to have like a lighter, I don't know, more pleasant sound. I mean, you won't hear anything remotely resembling like the weightiness of some Beethoven sonatas in these, little miniature sonatinas. Unfortunately, the word sonatina has not been used consistently throughout time. So nowadays, we refer to a sonatina as like kind of a miniature sonata. But say, for example, in Bach's day, he called a sonatina basically an introductory movement. And just because something is a sonatina doesn't by default mean it's going to be easy, because Charles Alkin is an example of someone who wrote very complicated sonatinas. So there's sort of like a general consensus, but then there's also some sonatinas that don't fit that specific definition. There's like all shapes and sizes. In general, though, these are the main characteristics of a sonatina. They are short. They're generally 2 to 3 movements long. They have lots of different like technical patterns like scales and triads incorporated in them. And they generally have like a light character. They're not too serious. They're not too heavy. Probably the most famous collection of sonatinas are Clementi's opus 36 set of 6 sonatinas. And these are suitable for intermediate level players, like anywhere from a level RCM level 3 to 7, I believe they range. We've already talked about Clementi himself in a previous video, so check that out if you haven't. And in the not too distant future, we're also going to be doing a tutorial on one of Clementi's sonatinas. There's a difference between a sonata as a genre and sonata as a form. And this is where things get a little confusing, so I just wanted to take a second to explain this. A sonata can refer to an entire composition, like, for example, Beethoven's Sonata Opus 2 No. 1. It's like a title, it's a genre. But the word sonata can also mean a structure. So, for example, in a sonata, such as Beethoven's Sonata No. 1, Opus 2, the first movement is going to be written in sonata form. As we've talked about in the previous video on sonatas, they feature an exposition, development, and recapitulation, and they have other specific twists and turns that we're not really going to talk about today. But definitely freshen up on that if you have no idea what I'm talking about, if you missed that video. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because the same is true of sonatinas. So the word sonatina refers to a genre of composition. So, for example, Clementi's Sonatina in C major, Opus 36 No. 1. It's a title. The first movement of sonatinas are almost always written in a shortened, simplified version of sonata form. So the two words can get a little confusing, but they do have multiple meanings. Here's what sonata form in a sonatina usually looks like. You have an exposition, which is like the main part of the piece, and usually by the end of it, it modulates to kind of prepare for the development. The development section is where material from the exposition is like twisted around and manipulated a little bit. It usually goes to a darker place. It kind of serves as a counterpart or a transitional section. And then the third part of the sonata form would be the recapitulation, which is a fun word to say, and it's basically the same thing as the exposition, just a repeat. The ending is usually a little different. So that's the first movement of a sonatina. So after the first movement, it's more variable, but you'll often see the standard slower movement in the second movement, and that's often going to be in the form of a minuet or something in 3/4 or 6/8 time. And then the final movement, if there is one, is usually going to be pretty lively, pretty fast, and it could be in a variety of different song forms, including rondo or theme and variations and others. For our examples to understand these points, we're going to look at 2 different sonatinas today. The first one we have out here is by Clementi. It's his opus 36, number 1. It's very, very famous. It's in the key of C major. You've probably heard the tune before. And I think that it's a pretty good demonstration of the points that we've already talked about. So this one is an RCM grade 3 level, and it has 3 movements, which we'll look at. And the first movement here is going to be in shortened sonata form. So let's look at what that means. So you remember what our 3 parts are? We have the exposition, we have the development, and we have the recapitulation. And the exposition and recapitulation are so similar, I'm going to just like label them part A, and then the development is a different part. So you can almost think of sonata form as like a glorified ABA form or like ternary form. So let's look and figure out where these all go. So obviously at the very start, we have the exposition, because I mean, it's the beginning of the piece. So of course we're starting with the exposition. Da 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 da. You have your main tune going on right here. Where we know the development starts is usually really obvious, because I don't know if you notice here, but it's usually marked by repeats and double bar lines, and that's true of most sonatas or sonatinas. So looking through, you can kind of see that the notes are changing. You got the same rhythm and stuff. There's some consistency from the exposition. But now we're going to like darker keys. We have a G major chord sound over here. We have a C minor chord sound over here. So it's being twisted and turned a little bit. So now I'm just going to scan through and try to find where the recapitulation occurs. And it's going to be the same notes as the exposition. Aha, here it is. Now, I don't know if you noticed this. It's the same notes, C, E, C, G, G, but if we go to the very beginning, C, E, C, G, G, it's the same notes, but it can be easy to miss them because they move an octave lower for the recapitulation. And then they go on, it's basically the same, and then it kind of changes keys a little bit at the end. It doesn't modulate, doesn't do anything like that. It just finishes in the key of C major, very similar to how it started. So now that we've pinpointed its structure, let's hop to the keyboard, and I'm going to give you a little bit of like a playing example of the different parts. I'm not going to play through the whole thing, but I'll play through like tiny amounts of it and just kind of explain where we are as we go. Okay, so we're just going to take a super quick tour through the different parts, just to give you a sense of the character of the piece, and also to, just kind of like demonstrate what the exposition means and the development means and all that stuff. So here we go. So it keeps on going. That's the start of the piece. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. That is the exposition, and you can hear it's like very light and fluffy in texture, just very pleasant. So now we move on to the development, which is gonna get like a little darker. And then we roll into the recapitulation, which is the same thing as the beginning, which was here. And now we're down here. Anyway, so it's just a little bit different in the recapitulation, but overall it keeps the main feel from the exposition. And that is the first movement. The second movement of the sonatina is your standard slow movement. We know that because of the tempo marking andante, which means a walking speed. And then we also have dolce, sweetly. So we want to play this really nice and gently. We're also in a different key for the second movement. That's really common with sonatas and sonatinas. They're not all going to be, even though it's the sonatina in C major we're talking about, not every movement is going to be in C major. So we're in the key of F major for this one. So here we have a standard 3/4 time second movement. You'll often see second movements that are in threes, like 3/4, 6/8, 3/8, that kind of thing. And like we already talked about, they're often slow. So this is just quickly glancing through the form, because usually the forms of these movements are incredibly simple. We have just like simple A-B form here. And that literally just means that there's 2 parts. There's part A and part B, and that's the whole thing. Of course, our section A is at the very, very beginning. Now, if we scan through and see where things really start changing, I would probably consider the start of the next part to be right here, because we're shifting into a minor key, da, 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 C minor, and then through to the end with a slight return and a slight callback to the A section here, but it does change, so I don't think it's a true ABA form. I think it's AB. Anyway, that's getting maybe a little too intense. Basically, all you need to know about this middle movement is that they're usually going to be slow, they're usually going to be light and graceful in character, and let's hop to the keyboard and take a look at some of this. So we'll play just a little bit from the contrasting middle movement. It's contrasting because the first and third movement, the outside sandwich bread part of the piece, is very fast, upbeat, lively, and the middle movement is still, it's played fast, but it's at an overall slow tempo, and it's very gentle. It's got that kind of like swaying, almost minuet-like feel. Anyway, so it kind of carries on like that. That's the A section. That's the main tune of the piece. And then the B section is kind of like in the first movement. We have a little bit of a contrast. It goes into this darker place. And then once that's finished, we kind of return to the beginning. But it's just a little bit different, so kind of has like a little bit of an ABA format, and you can hear that. And then our typical final movement is fast, which we know because vivace, which means lively. I always like to think of it as vivacious, because whenever I see it, that's what I think of immediately. It kind of means the same thing. So you want to play this lively, and it's, you know, it's pretty jolly, pretty upbeat. So a close look at the form doesn't reveal anything like too complicated or crazy. You have like the main part, da 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 da, kind of going all the way through, and then it changes keys. We modulate briefly to the key of G major for a middle contrasting part, and then we return to the original A section, the main part, and it does return to some of the material from the B section, but it keeps it all in the key of C, so it's not like it's basically in rounded binary form as far as I'm concerned. So let's take a quick listen to this on the keyboard. Again, I'm only going to show you like a couple little clips and stuff just to give you a general idea of the feel. And I don't want to dwell on the final movement just because it's not like remarkable in its format or anything like that, but I do want to give you a little taste of it so you can hear kind of the energy. It would even have more energy than the first movement, just to kind of finish everything off on a super lively note. That is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, if you want to keep updated on new videos, you can subscribe to this channel, and we put out new videos every Tuesday and Saturday. Thank you for everyone who supports these videos and helps make them possible. You can come visit me over on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. I think that's it. And I will catch you in the next video.